welcome back to another edition of Around the Association. I am your host, Charles Fallon, back in here. But today, for the first time since the pilot episode of the ASCA Weekly Podcast, we've got a special guest, and it is ADRA TV lead commentator Nic Douglas back in here.
Great to be back. It's been way too long, man. I've had a lot more responsibility since we launched that first episode of this podcast. But man, I'm glad to be back on and talk about the ASCA today.
Exactly, man. It's a pleasure to finally have you back in here. Yes, it's been crazy. I apologize. Of course, right as I start this, I get my phone blown up. So I apologize if you just heard that, but yeah, we're about to get right back into it. It was a crazy weekend at West Virginia. A lot of accidents, which is rare for the fastest track in the ASCA. So we'll be breaking down all of that, the remarkable comeback drives from Colin Ward, Orchidi, Greg Healey's dominant win. We also got to talk about the powerhouse teams and their struggles as well. We'll talk briefly about Craftsman as well and one of its powerhouse teams struggling. And then we'll briefly preview the Stone Yard. It's a cup only weekend this week, so that will also be something to look forward to. But before we get into it, first, we got to shout out the sports premier partner, Circle B Diecast/Plan B Sales. Use coupon code ASCA for free shipping on any orders $20 or more inside the US. If you want to cop Greg Healey's replica diecast after his big win and the big news, spoiler alert, that he is going to be remaining with Snoots Enterprises through the 2029 campaign, head on over to Circle B Diecast/Plan B Sales and you can get that. And also, we got to shout out the ASCA's merchandise shop as well. I do believe we have some Greg Healey merch up there. So, hey, if you want to cop some Greg Healey merch or Diego Orchidi merch after his remarkable performance, you can also do that. Click that first link in the description. So let's get into it. And first, I guess we'll start with you, Nic. Basically, we all know the big story about the new regulations and how much it's really shook up the running order this year. And what did you think really when you saw Snoots Enterprises? They go 1-2 in final practice, they lock out the front row in qualifying, and then Greg Healey absolutely spanks the field. What were kind of your thoughts on Healey's dominant performance, really kind of his first win since 2024 and establishing himself as one of the big players this season for the championship?
Well, in my opinion, it was nothing new out of Greg Healey. Obviously, he's a defending champion, and he's dominated races like this before. What I was really surprised by is the big pickup from Lucas Sambert so far this season. You know, he's usually that 8 car. You know, Shane Park was obviously competitive, but, Bryce Mann, he was, bad. So,
Yep.
But Lucas Sambert has got this team looking like it could potentially be becoming a powerhouse organization like they hope to be. Like you said, locking up Greg Healey is great for their future. That's a driver you really don't want to let go because he's going to beat you in a better car for sure. If he heads to Michael White Racing or Ronnie Woods Motorsports, he's going to beat you probably. But it was great to see a lot more parity in the field for sure. Like we saw, really in the top 10, it was all the powerhouse teams. So I guess there wasn't a couple underdog top 10s, but Graham Doherty looked great in his only 3rd race ever as a full-time Cup driver. And I just think there's going to be a lot more parity throughout the field. Obviously we've talked about Orchidi Bros Racing and Ronnie Woods Motorsports, kind of putting all their money in the last year's car, and everyone else set money aside for these new regulations. So I think it's going to be about halfway through the season. We're going to see the field really even. And it looks like right now, Snoots Enterprises, they've got it down. Like you said, they were dominant in practice, qualifying. And then, of course, Greg Healey dominated the race. So I think so far, Greg Healey has got to be your your title favorite, but there's still such a long way to go. And there's going to be teams like I don't see Orchidi Bros Racing or Ronnie Woods Motorsports staying behind on these new regulations for much longer. By the Windows 300, I think they're going to be caught right back up and back to winning races weekly.
Yeah, for sure. You had a lot of really good points in there. And, kind of on the parity aspect, it's interesting, because we go to qualifying and practice and, Orchidi Rose Racing and Ronnie Woods Motorsports, they were way in the back. They're all outside the top 10. Qualifying, they all qualified outside the top 10. But then you look at the results, you got Colin Ward second, Diego Ortiz third, Carson Schmidt fourth, Todd Kidd sixth. And mainly a lot of that was due to some of these underdog teams making mistakes. So I guess it kind of goes to show why they are powerhouse teams, because you look at guys like Braden Bennett, he had that big crash. Ian Adande, Aiden Romo, they had their pit penalties and just a lot of mistakes from those guys, and being caught up in things for like Ross Jackson, Lucas Sambear, and Norm Lester. So that was interesting as well to kind of see that dichotomy. But I also do want to ask you, Nic, so let's get into the full details on Healy's contract extension that just broke this morning. So Healy just inked a 3-year extension with Snoot Enterprises worth $48 million. Now, to put that in perspective, he had signed a 6-year contract extension back in 2020 that ran through obviously this season. That was worth $45 million total, so $9 million a year. Now he's going to be making $16 million a year, the highest paid driver in the sport next season through 2029. And I guess I'll ask you, do you think that Healy deserves, to be named the highest paid driver in the ASCA?
That's really a tough question because we continue to see inflation in the ASCA, and these contracts continue to go up every year. If it was, it could have been someone else, like for example, maybe Carson Schmidt or any young driver really that was on a big team like this was probably going to become the next most paid driver, and it's probably going to be the theme of big free agents for the next couple of years, just because of how contracts have rose so much since Healy signed his last one. $16 million is quite an investment, but I mean, like I said, Healy is a champion of the sport. I think he has 11 career wins. I mean, he literally put Snoot's Enterprises, he made them relevant. Like, this team was a complete non-factor before he came to the Cup Series every single week. So I completely understand wanting to pay him that much money. I think he deserves to be maybe not the most paid driver in the sport, but definitely when you think of the most paid drivers in the sports, he should be one of those. And like I said, I think eventually someone is going to pass him up. Maybe that's not even better than Healy, talent-wise, but it's just the way the market is going right now. All these prices are rising. Young talent is so valued. But I think if Healy continues to have a more dominant races like this, I know he's 8th in points, didn't have the greatest 2 races to start the year, but that West Virginia race really convinced me that he's going to be strong this year, just because that was kind of the first true litmus test to these new regulations. But like I said, that Healy's a guy you want to lock up. You don't want him going to Ronnie Woods Motorsports, Michael White Racing, or who knows, maybe even Orchidi Bros Racing if they somehow had an opening. And then you have to sit from the sidelines of Snoot Enterprises and watch him beat you every week.
Yeah, exactly. I think Snoots, they wanted to try to play hardball with Healy, and we heard the rumors that they wanted him to sign a more long-term extension or to take less money, but you kind of pointed out the drivers have all the leverage in the silly season market right now, because we saw what guys like Brent Renner got paid on the open market. We saw what Chris Barrymore last year got paid on the open market. Todd Kidd recently signed a $90 million extension. He's going to be making $15 million a year starting in 2027. So, the prices continue to go up and up, and Healy knows that if he tests the market, like you said, a Michael White Racing, one of these other teams, whoever had an opening, who knows, Tico Bound Motorsports, they've been known to throw money around. He was going to get a bag on the open market. So, and he is, Snoots is basically their entire team. All 11 of their wins, their championship, it's all come through Healy. So they had to get this deal done. For Healy, it gives him much needed stability. He gets his wish to be the highest paid. He wasn't even in the top 10 drivers in terms of salary heading into this season. So a much needed raise for him as well. And sticking to the Snoots theme, we'll talk briefly about Lucas Sambert as well in his contract situation, because he's had an interesting start to the season. He's qualified top 5 in the last 2 weeks, but he also has 2 DNFs in those races. Now, last week obviously wasn't his fault, but the Streets Computerville was. And right now, he's on the last year of a prove it deal with Snoots. There's rumors that he wants to test the market. He wants to make a lot more money. If you're Snoots Enterprises, do you pay him? Let's say he wants $8 million a season. Do you pay him that, or do you let him test the open market?
Well, $8 million a season would be half of what Healy's contract is. I don't think you lock up Sambert. I mean, there's still, I think this is something that's going to have to happen later in the season, because he's got to, like you said, he's on that prove it deal. He's going to have to prove that he can remain up front and competitive. But like you said, he's DNF'd the last 2 races. So that's really concerning. You can qualify well all you want, but if you can't finish the race, it's not really something that you're going to want on your team. I think Sambert has showed a lot more speed this year so far. And I think Snoots Enterprises as well is better as a whole this year. I'm not saying that to discredit Sambert, but I don't know right now. I don't think right now I would put $8 million into him. And I think if he tests the open market, maybe like Tico Bound Motorsports would give him that, but I don't really think he is in the market for that much money yet. Now, if he can continue to qualify well, but actually back up his starting position with good finishes, then yeah, of course you're going to want to pay him 8, maybe even 10 million. And if he wins the race, absolutely pay him 8 million. Because right now I'm not sure if Snoots Enterprises can get someone out of the Craftsman series as good as Sambert, because all the top guys, Gunnar Thorson, he could go to Snoots Enterprises, but it's very likely that he's probably going to take over for Norm Lester once he decides to step down or retire, or even if he just gets released. I assume retirement is going to come first for him, though. And then, of course, the 18 is already taken by Del Val. Dunham, Ford driver. I mean, sure, he could jump over to Chevrolet, but the odds of all that happening is very unlikely. So I think you want to sign probably Sambert to a smaller deal and another short-term deal, either so he can continue to develop, or if it doesn't pan out, you can line something up and you're not locked into a big contract like that and it turned into be a disaster.
Yeah, exactly. We've seen a couple of those instances this season where teams finally got out from under their bad contracts, and Ryan Dixon and Jared Ayers, where they locked those guys up to long-term extensions and their performance plummeted, right after. So that's an interesting discussion, and it's interesting as well for Snoots' Craftsman program, because they have a couple rookies right now, and they're both outside the top 10 at points. So they're not really showing much. They're both also extremely young. Calvin Terry III and Travis Wolf, they're both 20 and 19 respectively. So it seems like they both have a really long ways to go. While Sambert, he's 31, he's a stable veteran. He can't seem to close the deal. So it's going to be interesting to see how that situation plays out. And if he does hit the open market, he could be one of the bigger names on the market this season. But moving on, we also got to talk about a couple of remarkable performances in the Little General 200. and that would be from Colin Ward and Diego Orchidi. And I guess we'll start with the points leader first. Colin Ward, what a day the 24-year-old had. He starts 17th. He drops outside the top 20. He goes a lap down. He gets his lap back, and he drives all the way back up to second at day's end. And Nick, I want to ask you, we all knew the potential of Colin Ward, and we've seen what he's done in the Craftsman Series, but did you think that he would be this good, leading the points only 3 races into his second season? Like, are you surprised by how quickly he's developed?
I wouldn't say I'm as surprised as how quickly he's developed, but I am pretty surprised that he is leading the points. Um, we all knew he was going to be a star. He has a great team around him. But he kind of quietly leads the points, if you ask me, because like sure he had that amazing drive at West Virginia, but of course he couldn't like he led laps. I guess he's led laps in the other 2 races this year. But to me, when you look at this year, I kind of think like as the best driver has been so far as probably Brent Renner. I mean, he's second, only 1 point back. I mean, Renner's kind of put together probably the most complete 3 races so far. But Colin Ward, he's going to be at the top of the point standings, not necessarily the top, but like the top 5 for a long time. This guy is a star. I'm not shocked at all that he is already panned out to be this good. Of course, once again, still a long season to go, 14 races, lots can change. But that drive on Saturday in the Little General 200 just really shows how talented he is. And most young drivers would be more aggressive coming up through the field, maybe hit the wall or make a mistake. And Ward stayed calm the entire race, and that's why he's going to be such a great driver, is because he doesn't panic, and he's just a wheelman. Like he's got talent. So I definitely think this is going to be something we're going to see for a long time. And uh, I'm like 100% sure Ward will win his first career race this year. I just don't see how it doesn't happen.
For sure. He's had an outstanding start to the campaign thus far. And a huge talking point for him has been dealing with adversity. And I came on here last week and kind of criticized him for it, because last week he was so close to that first win. And he obviously blew the corner with 5 laps to go and lost the race. And, in the Craftsman Series, he didn't really face much adversity. But we knew he was going to face it in the Cup Series. And it seemed like, after his, kind of blowing the race last week, he was struggling to deal with it. But to claw back when that team, Ronnie Woods Motorsports, they didn't have the speed this weekend, they didn't have the pace, but he stayed out of trouble. He kept fighting. They made the right adjustments. He finishes second. And then let's also talk about a guy who we know is incredibly talented, 4-time champion, Diego Orchidi. What a wild weekend for him. And he came into, this race weekend having won 4 out of the last 5 at West Virginia. He swept this track last season, but he was 18th in happy hour. They fail inspection and qualifying. Nick, let me ask you, how shocked were you when you saw Diego almost seemingly out of nowhere on that final restart? He's second, chasing Greg Healey for the race win.
Not shocked at all. I mean, it's Diego Orchidi at West Virginia. I mean, I thought he was going to win the race from last. Once I saw he was going to the rear, I was like, "Yep, he is going to be the first driver to win from the rear since Ryan Dixon." Of course, Ryan Dixon did it at Ajax Super Speedway, so wasn't shocked at all. The guy's just insanely good here, and it pains for me to say that because it's my home track, and I have to see the same guy win every single time. So it was nice to see Greg Healey get a win this weekend to change that, because, like you said, Orchidi had won 4 out of the last 5, and it kind of gets boring seeing the same guy win, no matter how good he is. But I wasn't surprised at all that he was up there at the end of the race. I honestly, like I said, thought he was going to win the race. I was surprised that Healy was able to pull away. I mean, of course, Healy had the best car, obviously, but Orchidi is probably the best. Not probably, is the best driver at West Virginia. So I thought for sure he was going to pull off some type of miracle and win this thing. But it was kind of surprising to see him actually fall off there in those final laps and only finish third. But still, I mean, last to third is an incredible comeback. And that's something that a champion like him is gonna do, especially his best track.
Exactly. And something else I wanted to ask you about, in terms of the championship overall, after the way Diego lost that title last year, incredibly demoralizing to kind of lose it on a tiebreaker. He's sitting now 35 years old. He's kind of been hit or miss to start the new year. He did finish top 5 in the season opener, but he obviously had the drama with Carson Schmidt. He wrecked last week. He comes back out here, drives from last to third. Do you still think that even though he is sixth in points, he's over 20 out of the points lead, do you still think that Diego is a real threat to win this year's championship?
Absolutely. 20 points for Diego Orchidi is nothing. Now, if we were saying like he was in Todd Kidd's position, well, even Todd Kidd, I mean, he's only 40 points back, but if we were saying he was in Todd Kidd's position right now, you would start to have some doubts. But 20 points is nothing for Diego Orchidi. I don't know how many times this guy, I mean, I don't remember what year it was, but I remember he was awful in the first half of the year and came back and I don't remember, did he win the championship that year or did he come close? But I know that he had like the greatest second half to a season we've ever seen. So
Yeah, he's done that a couple times. 2020 he won it. 2022 he finished second.
yeah, I think he's probably done it both then. I was specifically thinking of 2022 then, but yeah, 2020 he won it. So exactly, 20 points is nothing for him. I expect him to be fighting with Colin Ward, Brent Renner if he stays up there, and probably Greg Healey for this year's title. Randall Woods is also kind of even with Orchidi, and Shane Park has got some ground to make up, but I think those are kind of the names to watch. Possibly Todd Kidd. Todd Kidd could have an amazing turnaround. He is the defending champion, so he's got some motivation to defend his title, but man, he's had a horrible start to the year. We got people out here calling him Todd Mid, and he just won a title 4 races ago. So, but Orchidi's name should always be associated with the championship until proven otherwise.
Yeah, speaking of Todd Kidd, that actually brings me to my next subject, and we got to talk about Ronnie Woods Motorsports. And obviously, last year we talked about them in a very positive light. They win the championship with Todd Kidd via tiebreaker. And like you said, people are calling, Todd Kidd Todd Mid now, which is crazy. That was trending on Twitter after the race, because he's sitting 18th in points right now. And while for Ronnie Woods Motorsports, Colin Ward is leading the points, I think that's much more of an outlier, because you look at Shane Park, he had to retire early at West Virginia. The first half of that race was actually a complete meltdown for the team. Shane Park retires with the stuck throttle. Chris Barrymore just loses it. He loses it. He DNFs again. He's 20th in points. You got Todd Kidd 18th in points. And then you've got Shane Park 11th in points. So let's ask, Ward's up there, competing for the championship, but is it time to be concerned about Park, Kidd, and Barrymore and their championship hopes this season?
Well, I think Colin Ward is proving that this car is easily good enough to be a champion contender. We'll start with Shane Park. He's only about 25 points back, I think, is what I saw. Like you said, 11th in points. That is not something. I mean, he's got a doubleheader coming up at the Michigan Road Course, and he could very well win both races. So I'm not counting Shane Park out unless he has a complete collapse over these next few races. I'm not counting Shane Park out until that doubleheader weekend because he could win both races and gain so much ground off of that. Todd Kidd has had a horrible start to the year, but everything that's happened to Todd Kidd so far has not been his fault. Of course, he was caught up in the wreck at the Ajax 200 between the two CJ Barrymore Racing drivers. That wasn't his fault. Then he has, I think it was an engine blow up at the streets of Computerville. Not his fault again. And he quietly ran. He got a quiet 6th place at West Virginia, which, sure, not the greatest finish in the world, but Ronnie Woods Motorsports was having a pretty bad day other than Colin Ward. So a 6th place is pretty considered a win for him, actually, since he's not even finished the first 2 races this year. So I'm not too worried about Todd Kidd, but he is in a big hole. He's gonna have to win a couple races to probably get back into conversation. Chris Barrymore, I don't know where to start about Chris Barrymore. I just can't believe he got paid this much money. He's never had a complete season at CJ Barrymore Racing. He may go start the season off on fire and then he just falls off. Or this year, he like you said, he struggled at his best track or one of his best tracks. When he spun out, I think he wasn't even, he was just outside the top 5, I'm seeing. But, usually Barrymore's really good here, and he lost the car. He's got the Stone Yard next week, which he's also very good at. So if Barrymore doesn't have a good race at the Stone Yard, I'm counting him out. He hasn't, and throughout his whole career, he just hasn't proven to me that he can put a complete season together. So yeah, he's got to have a big weekend next weekend because he's even farther back than Todd Kidd. So he's really got to get to work on turning his season around if he doesn't want to make Ronnie Woods Motorsports look bad for signing him for that much money.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you consider the performance of Ross Jackson this season as well, who, he was top 3 in points before being caught up in the accident with Barrymore, ironically enough. So Barrymore definitely has his work to do cut out for him, I should say, way down there, 20th in points. And I should also, we've kind of touched on it briefly, but let's talk about the top 3 in the standings right now. So I get we're only 3 races in the season, and we still got 14 more races to go. We have like 3 more months of ASCA action to kind of settle things, but we've got kind of a bit of separation with Colin Ward, Brent Renner, and Carson Schmidt from Graham Doherty in the 4th position. Do you think, I know we kind of hinted on Ward being a serious title contender, but do you think that Brent Renner and Carson Schmidt are serious championship contenders as well right now?
Well, like I said about Brent Renner, I think Brent Renner has had a quietly great season so far. He brought home a top 10 this week in the Little General 200, and in the Ajax 200, I think he finished second. Yeah, he got runner up. So I mean, he was first and second in the first 2 races of the year. And I tell you what, did not see him winning at the streets of Computerville at all. Like that completely caught me off guard. So it's good to see him having success. But one thing we know about Brenner, at least in his past, is that he's always been, a guy that flirts with the top 5 in points. But when you come to the end of the season, he's never usually in contention for that title. So we're gonna have to see how that plays out. Just based off history, I would say Renner probably isn't there, but I mean, he's had a really strong start to the season as well as Greg Healey. I mean, right now those 2 are the favorites for the title. I expect Renner to maybe fall off a little bit, and of course Colin Ward also is a favorite early in the season as well. But Carson Schmidt, I don't know. We've seen a lot of potential out of Carson Schmidt. For me, Schmidt he's just kind of been getting lucky. I think I don't think he's ran into any trouble yet. It's just so early, man. It's hard to predict because we've got guys like Kidd who have 2 DNFs, and then we got guys like Marcus Edwards who stayed clean and is 5th in points. And that's no offense to Marcus Edwards, but he's not going to stay, and unless he has an incredible season, he's probably not going to stay in the top 10 in points. So it's really hard to predict. But like I said, Colin Ward and Greg Healey and Renner are probably the three favorites right now, in my opinion. Um, I think Renner is going to be up in the standings for most of the year. I don't know if he's going to be able to close it out though, because just like we've seen him, he's always flirts with being a championship contender, but he can never make the jump. Colin Ward, it's his second season. So far, he's had a sophomore splash. Let's hope that doesn't turn into a slump. Um, he's got a lot of tracks where he could win at in this season. I mean, I think it's no doubt he's going to win a race, maybe two. And then Carson Schmidt, he's been probably the best driver ever for Orchidi Bros Racing in that third 12 car. So it's great to see him doing so well this season, and we'll have to see how he does as well. I think he's a guy that he could win two races and be there, but I don't think he has made the jump yet. But anything can happen in these next 14 races. So it's just something you got to keep an eye on. But yeah, I truly think that at least Ward and Renner will probably be there by the end of the season. At least probably by the Northern 200, they will still be in contention.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's very early in the season. And, you see Greg Healey eighth in points. I know you mentioned him as a title contender, and people may not get that, but it's also worth noting that he was a lap away from winning the Ajax 200 had he not run out of fuel. And that 20th place finish he got in that race, that's really the only reason he's back there in eighth instead of probably, right up there inside the top three, with his dominant victory. So let's briefly talk Craftsman for a bit as well. And we saw Cup drivers 1-2, and it was a great victory for Ross Jackson. But I actually want to focus on the Ford development program. And they were looking so good early in the race. They had been so dominant all weekend. They were running 1, 2, 3, 4 for a time. And then you go to a stretch of 20 laps. I commented this on Twitter. In 20 laps, they managed to go from 1, 2, 3, 4 to all four of those cars being out of the race.
Wow.
Kind of take me through, what do you think went wrong for the Ford development program last Friday at West Virginia?
All right, so we start off. Obviously, we're going to start off with the big incident between Graham Doherty and Ian Adande. That, in my opinion, was more of a racing incident. But of course, yes, it was a racing incident. I'm not placing the blame on Adande. I think what happened here is there's just kind of, I guess the word is there's not a lot of like chemistry between the Ford development program. We've heard the talks of them wanting to split up. I think this is an example, and that wreck also took out Jordan Raynard, but I think that incident between the 22 and the 60 is the example of them not having chemistry. Usually on the restarts, teammates aren't going to race each other that hard. And I think there's not a lot of chemistry. I mean, sure, those two guys are Cup drivers. They're not going to be in those cars for the full season. But there's not a lot of cohesion when these Cup drivers do come in. I mean, you see Chevy usually is probably the best team. A lot of times Chevy, no matter if it's Snoots Enterprises or if it's Ronnie Woods Motorsports or sometimes even Dexter Andrews Motorsports, they all tend to work together regardless of the different team logo on their car. I think that Ford is they've had these troubles in the past. You think way back to Devin Smith when he has having issues at the Ford development program. I think they got to sit down with all their drivers and tell them, we all race for Ford. We need to help each other out and not, maybe race each other. I mean, I'm sure if this is maybe on a 2-to-go restart, you can't really get mad at Adande for trying to send it and win the race. But there was still, I think, 15 laps to go. And 15 laps is a lot at West Virginia. I mean, it's a 2-mile track. It's not like Belltown where the laps are clicking away like that and the race would be over in 5 minutes. Like I said, I think it's just a lack of chemistry at the Ford development program. And, I don't know what they're going to do, if they're going to break up and go their separate ways at the end of the year. But right now, it looks like none of them want to work together. They're all kind of fighting for themselves. And when you got a team of 5 cars, I think they have 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, 5. When you have a team of 5 cars, there has got to be some chemistry, because last time I checked, there are 20 cars in the Craftsman series. So they have 25% of the field. And if they're not working together, they're going to most likely run into each other every single week, since there are so many cars that they have. And then Sean Wooden, what happened to Sean Wooden again? I can't quite remember.
Yeah, so with Wooden, he had a pit road incident with Cameron Barrymore. He was trying to leave his stall. Barrymore was trying to get in. They had a collision.
Yeah.
His rookie crew chief, Robbie Patterson, he took full responsibility. And so Wooden's 15th in points right now.
Yeah, so that's just a miscommunication. I mean, Wooden is a veteran of both the Cup Series and the Craftsman Series. I mean, that's just something that, I mean, he literally won the championship last year. I'm not too worried about Sean Wooden. Mistakes like that happen all the time. They got to get some communication between the crew chief and the driver, and I think they'll be all right. But like I said, with Adande and Doherty, and not just those two, it's everyone that comes in to drive those cars. They all got to be on the same page. They can't be out here trying to run, fight for themselves. Obviously, winning is the most important thing, but when you're fighting for yourselves and wrecking it at the whole team, 3 of the 5 cars, not a very good sign.
Yeah, for sure. They definitely got some issues that need to be ironed out. At least Caden Dunham salvaged the 4th place finish for the team, but because otherwise, it's really looking bad for them. Having all of their cars, bringing home poor finishes. But I also do want to ask you as well, we do have 7 rookies in the Craftsman Series this year. And since they are off this week, I know we're only 3 races in, but which rookie would you say has impressed you the most thus far? We know we've seen Caden Dunham win. We've got Matt Chamberlain leading the points, 18-year-old Zach Triton. He's 5th in the standings. Which rookie do you think has done the best job through the opening 3 weeks?
Well, we obviously saw Caden Dunham win last week at the streets of Computerville in the Pilot 100. That was a pretty great win for him to be able to outduel Tony Delval II. I mean, that was a great move that he made going into turn 1 around the outside. No contact made at all. That move really stuck with me, that he is going to be probably a generational talent for Ford. Matt Chamberlain leading the points is a big surprise. Not something I saw coming. So far, at least, he's quietly put together some top 5s, some top 10s to put himself in that position. Kind of stayed out of trouble. And Zach Tritton, we've seen the Hood Motorsports be kind of like a midfield team in the Craftsman Series. He's looked really strong so far to start this year as well. I wouldn't say that Hood Motorsports is one of the top teams in the Craftsman Series. So for him to be up there only, I think, about 10 points back after 3 races, he had a great run at West Virginia. I think he finished 5th. So he's also looked really good so far. But I would definitely say that I'm most impressed so far with Caden Dunham, just because of that win he had in the Pilot 100. I mean, such a great move. And, obviously Tony Delval II is pretty much everyone's favorite to win this title. And for him to outduel him like that, I mean, yeah, he's got to be my rookie so far that's done the most. But that's not discrediting Matt Chamberlain. I mean, he's leading the points. So be very interesting to see how this Craftsman Series championship plays out, because we also got Sean Wooden, like you said, 15th in points. I think we're going to see Raynard jump up in points as well. Thorson's down in 6th. I think he'll be a factor. Taylor Motorsports has looked really strong so far. And of course, you've got Dunham and Delval as well.
Yeah, I think the thing about Caden Dunham is he's such a raw talent. And you talked about it with that move he put on Tony Delval II at only 18 years old. Like, that is stuff that we don't even see 10-year Cup veterans pull off. So such a raw talent, and we know that he's had the DNF issues, but the raw pace is certainly there, and he's going to be a name to pay attention to, I think, for the next 10 to 15 years, to say the least. But moving on to the final subject of this podcast, let's talk the Stone Yard. And obviously, one of the toughest tracks in the sport to drive. This is probably going to be the most driver centric track we've seen with the new regulations thus far. No Craftsman this week, just Cub. So I guess I'll hand the floor to you and let you give three drivers that you'd say should be heavy favorites to watch in Saturday's ComScope 200.
So when I say when I give these two drivers, I'm not necessarily saying they're all going to win, but they are guys that you need to watch. Like I said earlier, Chris Barrymore, you got to have an eye on him. This is a track that he has had success at in the past, and he has got to start with at least, I'd say, a top 3 finish to turn his top 5 at worst. He has got to have a good run at the Stone Yard to prove that he can, hold up here, Ronnie Woods Motorsports, because we've seen Todd Kidd and Shane Park lead this team for the past couple years. Chris Barrymore has got to have a great race if he wants to start getting back in the contention to be a championship contender, and show that he wasn't overpaid this offseason. You can't go to Stone Yard and not mention Diego Orchidi. I mean, I don't know how many times he's won the ComScope 200 at this point, but I remember there was a stretch where he won it like 3 or 4 years in a row. You can't count him out ever at the Stone Yard. He's also a little farther back in points, so this would be a good race for him to get back near the top of the standings. And like I said, it's just another track he's had so much success at. He could qualify in the back again, and he's probably going to be up at the front on a late race restart if there is one. And you're going to think, is he really going to win this race? He started last. And then another guy that you got to watch out for is Todd Kidd. Kidd's obviously won here before, I believe at least, but he's shown a lot of speed at the Stone Yard in the past. So Todd Kidd, another guy in the back of the standings that needs to have a good run at the Stone Yard, because I think this is the race where we're going to see guys like Graham Doherty, Marcus Edwards, Ross Jackson probably not have the best days and probably start to fall in the standings. And this is, like you said, this is probably the most driver centric track. So you're going to see the guys that are actually the true contenders start to separate themselves here. If we didn't see it already at West Virginia, you're certainly going to see it at the Stone Yard. So that's where Barrymore and Kidd need to take advantage and have great weekends this weekend so they can start climbing their way back up to the top.
Yeah, I agree with all of those. Barrymore and Kidd, they definitely need huge weekends this week. And, when it goes for my 3 guys to watch, I definitely got to throw Brent Renner out there. He's won here a couple times, I think 3 times actually in the past. He's quietly really solid here. Obviously enters second in points, red hot to
this
kick
could be a
off
huge race for him.
Exactly.
He could separate himself from everyone if he were able to win again.
Exactly. And, we know Colin Ward, only a second-year driver, he's only ran here twice. So he does not have the same experience, and the same could be said for Carson Schmidt, although he and Renner had a coming together here a couple years ago. It's going to be a huge race for Renner, for sure. I also think Cameron Atwood, we haven't said his name much at all this season, but he is a former champion and he's won here himself a couple times. He swept here in 2023, and last year he led 132 laps, but unfortunately had, I think, either a bad pit stop or a late pit road penalty that did him in. I think he's going to be a guy to watch. And so I think Atwood, I look at him, I look at Renner, and I also look at Norm Lester, another old guy, but he won here back in 2022, and he finished top 5 here last year. So keep an eye on those 3 as well. maybe more under the radar names to watch this weekend. And then I'm going to leave it off on this, Nick. Who is, it doesn't have to be out of your three guys you said to watch, but who is, if you had to pick one guy to win this race, who are you betting on?
I got to be completely honest with you. I really like Todd Kidd this weekend. He's had a lot of success, like I said, at the Stone Yard. I don't know the exact statistics, but he is the defending champion, and I think that he's going to show everyone he's not. He's getting clowned on Twitter like every single minute of the day right now, being called Todd Mid. I mean, that was one of the top trending hashtags after the Little General 200. If you're a defending champion, you're not going to let that slide. You're going to go shut up the field. And the Stone Yard is really one place to go do that. I mean, it's definitely the hardest track on the schedule. So I like Todd Kidd. I think he's going to shut up the haters this weekend. Show everybody he's not Todd Mid. Go out, dominate maybe. If not, I think he's my favorite. I mean, I just don't see him struggling. I mean, like I said, everything that's happened in the streets of Computerville and Ajax Super Speedway wasn't of his own doing. But I think Todd Kidd is the guy I'm going with this weekend.
Yeah, no, I actually agree with this pick. And I think I'm going to pick Todd Kidd as well, kind of for the same reasons. He is actually the defending Stoneyard winner. Last year, he outdueled Diego Orchidi in a critical race in that title fight that they had a year ago. He won this exact race in 2020. So he's a two-time Stoneyard winner. He's always ran, pretty solid here within the top five. And it is crazy that he's being called mid a year after he wins a record-tying 5 races and a championship.
Yeah, I just don't get that. I mean, everything that's happened hasn't been his fault. If he caused 2 wrecks, and maybe I'd understand, but I think he's going to shut up the haters.
Exactly. So I agree with this. I think Todd Kidd's going to bounce back as well. He has to bounce back at this point. He's 40 points back, 18th in the standings, and he signed a $90 million contract extension last year. They're not paying him to finish top 5 in points. They're paying him to win championships. So I think Todd Kidd's going to have a huge bounce back week, and I think it's going to be a fun weekend of action from the Stone Yard on Saturday. So it's a cup only weekend. But, hey, if you do want some additional diecast racing action this weekend, we've also got the NDRL back on ADRA TV this weekend. They're at West Palm. It's going to be an extremely fun race. I know, Nick, you're certainly looking forward to that one as well.
Yep, I will actually be in West Palm on Friday. I won't be at the Stone Yard on Friday for qualifying and practice. I will be in West Palm for Friday's Reeser Series race, covering that. But I will be back, of course, for the Stone Yard. And actually, I think the NDRL has lined up their schedule to where it's going to be a perfect doubleheader on Saturday. The ComScope 200 starts at 1 p.m. Am I correct?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, so we're going to have the ComScope 200 at 1 p.m. and then we're going to have the Good Sam 200 at West Palm at 4 p.m. So probably that race is probably going to start right as the race at the Stone Yard is closing out. So it's going to be a great day on Saturday. I mean, we haven't had one of these double headers, and I couldn't even tell you. It's probably been like 2 years. It's been forever since we've had a doubleheader like this. I know the NDRL has had a lot of funding issues and stuff over the past year. COVID really hit them hard. Unlike the ASCA, they've got some better management. I will definitely say that. But I'm excited to see those guys back on track. And one thing about the NDRL being back on track, this could really help Norm Lester and Gunnar Thorson because obviously Taylor Motorsports' flagship team is in the NDRL. So the more track time they have in the NDRL, I think that just helps Norm Lester and Gunnar Thorson as well. I mean, that's just going to be the more NDRL races they win, the more championships Jesse Price III wins, the more money that goes into their ASCA team. So that's one thing you got to look at.
Yeah, exactly. That's another underrated aspect. The research and development, the intel that the NDRL guys have. Obviously they're running different regulations than the ASCA, but hey, I mean, data is data. So, whatever they learn, they send it over to the ASCA guys, and the ASCA guys have a ton of intel that they can send over to the NDRL guys as well. So, it's going to be interesting to see that collaboration. It's going to be an incredible doubleheader weekend of diecast racing, and it was a pleasure having you back on here, Nic. Greatly appreciate you being on the show for sure.
Oh, yep, no problem. I mean, I'm glad to hop on after my hometown race at West Virginia, and hopefully we can do it again sometime. Hopefully, at least if not by the Windows 300, hopefully at least by the next West Virginia race.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. So that was another edition of Around the Association. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, leave a review on Spotify or Anchor, and we will see you after the Stone Yard this weekend.